Good. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tammy Echeverria, and I'm with the Department of Parks and Recreation. For the duration of the program, we are asking that everybody will mute themselves and turn their cameras off. We will turn the screen directly to our speaker during the presentation. All participants, with the exception of the speaker and Upper Dublin staff, will be muted with their video camera and web camera turned off. While we're going through, if you have a question or you would like to interact, you can put your questions in the chat box and we will read them throughout the presentation. We will also, at the end of the presentation, open it for a Q&A session. Participants who wish to speak can also raise their hand. If we're able to call on you and interact during the presentation, we will do that. But as I said, otherwise we will give you that time at the end as well. Upper Dublin Township staff reserves the right at any time to mute a participant, end a video stream of a participant, or terminate or end the meeting at our discretion due to hackers, inappropriate language, or any other activity that the staff deems inappropriate. This presentation is being recorded and will be downloaded on our website within a couple days. We ask for everyone's patience and understanding as we navigate through these unprecedented times and work through our virtual public presentations. We welcome any comments or suggestions for our virtual meetings or protocols for future meetings. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Kathy Salisbury with Temple University. Kathy?
Thank you, Tammy. So hello, everybody. I am Kathy Salisbury. I'm the director of the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University. And so what I'd like to do, because I do hope to use the chat a little bit and some of the other reactions. So if you kind of look at your screen, you'll see a place where it says reactions. It's a little smiley face. So if you could click on that and then with a show of hands, clapping hands or a thumbs up, let me know if you've been to the Ambler Arboretum before. That would be great. Just test out how interactive we could be. All right. So we have 4. Excellent. Well, that's good to know. Thank you for doing that. And you all found the reactions, so good deal. And if you can't find the reactions, of course you can, yep, as somebody just did, they put in the chat, I don't have the reactions, but I have been to the Arboretum. So I'm glad to know that you all have been there. So we're, or that some of you have been, and those of you who haven't, we certainly want to welcome you there. I do have a short video about the Arboretum I'd like to share with you before we get started. So we're going to talk about why native plants today. And in the chat, you can just share with me what brings you to this program today. Why are you interested in native plants or wondering more about native plants? Are you a native plant gardener, or what is it that you're hoping to get out of this? So feel free to put that in the chat as I work to share my screen here with you. All right, so I have native plants in my yard. I've been reading, oh, this is good too. We've been reading Doug Tallamy this summer, and I'm now determined to reduce my lawn and make my yard ecologically productive. Excellent. For those of you who may not be familiar, Doug Tallamy is an author. He is an entomologist based at the University of Delaware. And he wrote a book called Bringing Nature Home, and it really kind of took the gardening world by storm. And because it talks about the importance of native plants, which we're going to talk about today too, but it also talks about how you can convert your yard to more native plants. And what I really like about his book is that it's very accessible. It doesn't say, hey, you idiot who planted all this stuff in your yard, rip it all out and plant all this other stuff in your yard. He talks about taking small portions of your yard and transitioning it to native plants. He gives you a list of the most beneficial plants that if you only have a small space, or if you only want to make a small change right now, what would be the best plants to do that with. So he's a really excellent resource, and he's got some other books out now too since Bringing Nature Home, but I highly recommend that one. So yeah, so that's good. I'd like to plant more native plants in my yard, especially with the stream behind my house. Excellent. Hopefully I'll be able to help you with a little bit with that. I have a very small and empty space now, and I'm trying to make good choices. All right, very good. So I'm hoping we'll help you with that. So we are talking today about why native plants, why they're important. But as we go through, I'll also highlight some native plants along the way. So, but of course, feel free throughout this to put your questions in the chat. I'll try to address them as they come in, but if I don't, we'll certainly get to them at the end of this. So I am Kathy Salisbury, the director of the Ambler Arboretum, and I would normally take a couple minutes to tell you about the Arboretum, but I'm going to share this video with you about the Arboretum, and hopefully that'll get you inspired to come and visit again, or get more involved with the Arboretum. So let's do this. And you should just be hearing music. So that's a little bit about the Ambler Arboretum, and we certainly do hope that you will come and check us out and get involved with our programs and our walks and talks and that kind of thing. And we're really happy to be partnered up with Upper Dublin Township and offering programs together. So, so thanks for joining me here today. So as I go through these slides, I will tell you a little bit about the plants that are in the slides. And so the first one, title slide, had this plant in the background. And this is Tiarella cordifolia. This is foam flower. Now, foam flower, you may know it as a ground cover. So this is a native ground cover. And native ground covers are kind of tough to come by. And if you think about our deciduous forest ecosystem that we live in, evergreen native ground covers are especially challenging, but that's what a lot of people would like in their landscape. So as we're thinking about gardening with native plants and why native plants, we also want to think about the plant communities that our native plants exist within and the purpose that each plant's part of that community serves. So when we're thinking about planting with native plants and gardening with native plants, we're thinking beyond the beauty and the utility for us. We're thinking about our existence within a larger system and how the plants that we choose can support that larger system. This plant, I say that because a lot of people like the look of evergreen ground covers like Pachysandra and Vinca, and we don't have, if you look in our woods, we don't have that equivalent. We have evergreen ferns and, maybe some other plants that will work as ground covers, but they're not necessarily evergreen. But so we might want the look to replicate something that's non-native and not be able to get that. But we have to keep in mind that we're trying to support a bigger system that those other plants might not. So this is Tiarella cordifolia. Now this is a flower spike that's only about 4 inches tall. So this is a close-up, but I just love the salmon colored stamens that you have here and on these bright white flowers and these little tiny spring stalks of flowers. This is a ground cover that will fill in my house. They haven't been bothered by deer at all. And after 3 or 4 years, they just spread and make this great ground cover. I don't have to weed in them. I am a big proponent of using plants as mulch. So planting thickly and letting plants spread together so that you don't have to add mulch and you don't have to pull weeds. And this works really well. The Tiarella cordifolia works really well for that. And there's all kinds of cultivars out there, all kinds of varieties, which have different leaf patterns and leaf shapes. So you can get a little diversity in the looks there. So I can spell that in chat. I will get back to that, but yes, I can spell that for you. But if you just know foam flower, that will help too. So I just want to tell you a little bit about me and my perspective and where I come from when it comes to native plants, because I think that's important. I spent 9 years as the president of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. And in my role there, I didn't join the Native Plant Society of New Jersey because I knew a lot about native plants or was even passionate about native plants. I joined because I was curious about native plants. And so I think that gave me a unique perspective and ability to kind of listen to the conversations that were going on. And some of the conversations I heard were some people were just native plant purists. Anything that was going to be in their yard was going to be native. And then there were people who were sort of not as purist thinking. And so it was interesting to hear these conversations. And one of the things that really surprised me when I became involved was that nobody could agree on the definition of a native plant. And we're going to talk about what defines a native plant. And so, there's all kinds of ideas about what makes a native plant. And we're going to talk about the definition, but I'm going to encourage you to come up with a definition that works for you and makes sense to you, and then do your research accordingly. in addition to my work at that nonprofit organization, I also was the horticulturist for a couple of municipal park systems. And so in that role, I manage native plant communities, including managing the deer populations in those native plant communities. So I also know that a discussion about native plants can't exist without a discussion of deer management and about invasive plant control. And you really can't talk about native plants without invasive plants. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Personally, I garden primarily with native plants, and I have been involved in environmental organizations like the Perkiomen Watershed Conservancy, where I served on their board, and have helped them with their native plant initiatives as well. So that just tells you a little bit about me. But I think the other important thing to know about me is two of my favorite plants are not native plants at all. So I am not a native plant purist. I feel like I'm a native plant realist. And so that's my perspective, so you understand where I'm coming from. And here we have a big leaf magnolia in this photo, which is a native tree. And the flower, you can see, is about as big as your head. And it's just great, and it smells really good. So that's a little bit about my perspective. So why a native garden? So here we have, this is Solomon seal. This is a rhizomatous native plant, flowers in the spring. I have a lot of spring pictures in this slide show today, but this does get a nice yellow fall color too, which is nice. The deer do tend to eat this, but these white flowers in the spring are followed by blueberries in the summer, which are also decorative, and it spreads by colonies. And you have to remember, when you're planting native plants or any plants, the first year it sleeps, second year it creeps, third year it leaps. So you have to be patient with these and give them time to make their colonies and fill in as a ground cover, but eventually they will. So why a native garden? So in the chat, would you tell me why you think native plants are important? Give you a second to do that, or a few seconds. What is it about them that you think is important for including into your landscape? So I have that they thrive, habitat for various wildlife. I don't want to fight my clay soil too much. Great. It's a lot easier to work with the soil you have than to change the soil you have. So you have two choices in gardening, right? You can plant the plants that grow well in the conditions that exist, or you can change the conditions that exist to plant the plants you want to grow. And it's a lot easier to do the first one, to work with the soils and the conditions that you have, than to try and change those. Helping the overall ecosystem, not getting forced out by invasive plants. All right, good. So those are all great reasons. We're going to cover a few reasons why native plants in this talk. And so the reasons we're going to cover today are their support of wildlife, how they help the environment, keep the heritage of plants. Peggy, that is so important in a conversation. A piece of the native plant conversation that's missing is about our maintaining a sense of place and the heritage of the genetic even diversity of our plants. So that's a good one too. So helping the environment, less inputs, and they look nice. So we're going to cover those. Those are the answers I usually get when I ask this question. So before we get started about why native plants and why we would include them and why they're important, I would like from you, again, and practice in the chat one more time, is if you think of a definition of native plant in your head, what are the words that come to mind? How do you define a native plant? If you were going to tell somebody what is a native plant, what would you tell them? And while we're waiting for people to answer about the definition, I will tell you that this photo is of a Kalmia latifolia, the mountain laurel. All right, so I have naturally occurring plant to a specific region, good. Indigenous, vigorous, all right. One that works well in our area, all right. All right, good answers. So let me show you. This is Kalmia latifolia. This is our native mountain laurel. Mountain laurel is a pretty popular plant. It's sold in garden centers a lot, and a lot of people purchase it. But this is sort of, for me, a poster child about native plant gardens, because people might pick this because it's native, but then it won't do well in their landscapes because people want to plant it as a foundation planting in the full sun on the side of their house or next to the steps or the doorway or something. And when you look at where this plant grows, it loves sort of rocky ravine areas, well-drained soil, woodlands. It grows in the mountainous areas of Pennsylvania and along, sort of raised banks along creeks and rivers, lakes, that kind of thing. And it likes these damp and rich forests. And when you put it in a traditional sort of foundation planting in a landscape, it really doesn't thrive. It might survive, but it doesn't thrive. It doesn't grow well and can be disappointing. And so as we're thinking about native plants and the native plants we want to include in our landscapes, we want to make sure that we're considering where these plants grow. We want to look to nature to see what the habitats for these are and make sure we're planting the right plant in the right place, because if we don't have the right plant in the right place, it's not going to do well, and it's not going to offer those services that native plants should to support the system. So just because you like it and it's pretty doesn't mean that it's the best thing for your yard. So you really want to get to know your yard very well and what the plants need. Don't be drawn in by by what's in bloom at the garden center at the time. You want to make sure you have the right space for it and you're putting it in the right place. Also, native plants have evolved within a system. So it's not just them independently, but they've evolved within certain soil types in combination with certain fungus, in combination with certain birds, mammals that move their seeds around, insects that pollinate them. So they're part of a system. And Kalmia latifolia, the mountain laurel, is a great example of that. And so after this talk, you can go on YouTube and look for a video that is called Pollinating Mountain Laurel. And what you'll see is, if you notice on these flowers here, these are the stamens. These are the male reproductive parts of the flower. And here we have the pistil. And so notice how these are sort of stuck into these fused petals here. Well, what happens is a bee lands in here. And when the bee lands in here, as the bee steps on these stamens, these come up and they kind of whap the bee on the back, and that's how the bee gets pollen. And then he goes to another flower, same thing happens, and they move around, and that's how they move pollen around. So if you look here, these are loose and free from the flower, right? They've been pollinated, and these have not yet been. And so this is a plant adaptation that ties in with how the insects pollinate. And so remembering that native plants, again, not just there for our interests in our beauty and our aesthetics and our needs and our landscapes, but they've evolved within the system, and we're planting native plants to support or enhance or repair that system. So two of my favorite plants, I mentioned before, two of my favorite plants are not native plants at all. And the first one here is on the left. This is the blue flower here. Those colorful reds and purples at the bottom is an ornamental pepper. But the blue flower up top is Ceratostigma plumbaginoides, and it's called blue plumbago. And it is a ground cover. It turns red in the fall. These flowers bloom a true blue from late spring all the way through frost. And I just feel the deer don't eat it. I feel it's a really great ground cover plant. It's hardy. I just really like it. Nothing really bothers it at all. And so I've just liked it ever since I learned about it. And it's just something even before I knew about native plants, I just really like this one. And the one on the right-hand side is a Katsura tree. And this is Cercidophyllum japonicum. This is a Katsura new leaf. It emerges bronze. You can see sort of the flowers behind it. They're not really showy. But if you were to visit the Ambler Arboretum today, you would smell on the air in this breeze that we have today, what smells like sugar cookies or vanilla, or some people say cotton candy. And that is the smell of these leaves changing fall color. And I just love the smell, and nobody knows why it happens. You can't Google this and find out. There's theories, but nobody knows for sure why this plant would emit such a fragrance at the end of the leaves lifespan. And I just find that fascinating. And it's a beautiful tree. And so these are two of my favorite plants, which are not native at all. And but what I do know about them is that they have not shown, well, the one on the left, which is blue plumbago, has not shown any tendency for being invasive. It has not escaped cultivation into minimally managed areas, which was what we look for when we're talking about invasive plants. The Katsura tree, however, is showing up on some watch lists. And I know from the Arboretum perspective, it seeds in everywhere. We've got little baby Katsura trees coming up in all kinds of nooks and crannies. And so it's okay to have plants and include plants in your landscape that are not native. But what's not okay is not knowing how those plants are going to affect an area greater than your property, because everything we do in our landscape has the potential to influence a landscape much greater than ours. And so we really have to be responsible. If we're going to be about planting native plants and including native plants, we have to be responsible in understanding what these other plants are going to do. Birds move seeds around, and animals move seeds around. The wind moves seeds around. So we can't control what happens beyond our landscape. And so we have to be really thoughtful in what we plant. And so a prime example of this is the understory in Ralph Stover State Park up along the Delaware River. And the entire understory near a parking area, this was not planted. This is all burning bush. And this was, again, not planted by anybody who works there, but it was planted by birds who grabbed the seeds from burning bush that is very popular in other parts of landscapes. And then they come and sit and eat the seeds on the branches of the trees, and then they deposit the seeds and these grow. And a lot of us choose plants for our landscapes because they're pest resistant or disease resistant, and the deer don't bother them because we have such a big deer problem in this area. And what happens is when these plants seed into other places wildly, the deer don't eat them, pests don't eat them, and diseases don't get them. And so they end up thriving, while our native plants, which are affected by native occurring diseases, which are affected by naturally occurring insects, and the deer eat, are all of a sudden outcompeted, and they don't thrive while the invasive plants thrive. And this is what makes a plant invasive. And this is why we can't talk about native plants. I have a cat here. His name is Tom. He just loves Zoom meetings, and I have trouble keeping him away. So if you see him, that's Tom. And so he sometimes is restless. He's Zoom companion. So we can't talk about native plants and what makes a native plant without talking about invasive plants, because it's invasive plants that threaten native plant populations, and why it's so important that we include native plants in our landscapes to kind of help support what's going, help support those wild native plant populations. This is Kittatinny Valley State Park off of Route 80 in North Jersey. The whole understory in here is barberry. That's another plant that's planted very commonly in landscapes because deer don't eat it. It doesn't get diseases. It gets fruit, and you can see the fruit in here. The birds eat the fruit and spread it around. And so you might think, well, if the birds eat the fruit, you know, who cares? It's feeding the animals, it's feeding wildlife, so isn't that great? But the trouble is, once you have a monoculture like this, you only have one type of flower blooming at one time, that's one shape with one type of nectar. You have one type of fruit that's one size with one set of vitamins and minerals and proteins that's available at one time of the year. So that limits the amount of animals that can use this as a food source. And so what you've done is changed the diversity by diminishing the diversity of the forest plants. You've diminished the diversity of the forest animals as well. And so that is the trouble with invasives. You're just diminishing the diversity, and you know, the system breaks down. And so by planting native plants in our landscapes, we try to help with that, not only by not planting plants that will spread aggressively and outcompete native plants, but by supporting the system that has been threatened by invasions in other places. So when we talk about native plants, some people say, okay, if I want to plant a native plant, I'm going to plant plants that are native to Pennsylvania, or I'm going to plant plants that are native to New Jersey or Montgomery County, or whatever it is. But it's important to know that plants do not know our political boundaries, right? They don't know the lines that you cross to go from state to state. So native plants are actually native to regions, and the regions are based on geology and soils and the water table and the acidity of the soils and the climate, the temperatures, the frosts, the insects and the associated fungus. That's what plants know. And so plants occur in communities. And so the United States is divided up into ecoregions, physiographic regions. And it's really important to see here. So these are generally similar conditions, and generally you can find similar plant populations along in these different color areas. And so what you can see is that they cross state lines and they cross state boundaries, right? And they have, these names. And so I grew up in South Jersey in the Pine Barrens, very unique ecosystem. It was in this, it's called the coastal plain. And so that's what my ecoregion was. And so I could find plants that were native in Delaware and Maryland that would do fine in New Jersey. And that's why we can find plants that do fine here where we're in the Piedmont area, and the Piedmont extends down into northern Georgia. And so we can find plants like oakleaf hydrangea that aren't native to our woodlands up here, but do fine in our conditions. And so, so this is important that they're native to regions, not just to a particular state. And I use the example of the Pine Barrens too, because it's a unique ecosystem. It is, you could have a plant that's native to New Jersey up here in the Ridge and Valley section of New Jersey, which also has very unique ecosystems, but you could have a plant that's native up here that could be problematic and to the ecosystem in the Pine Barrens. And so just because it's native to a state doesn't mean that it's appropriate for where you're trying to plant it. And so you really want to be aware of the region where you live and the plants that are appropriate for that area. Cindy. Yes, thank you, Cindy, for putting the names into the chat of the plants I've shown so far. Yes, they are ID'd correctly. Thank you. And so here you see Pennsylvania's physiographic regions. Of course, there's miniature communities within each of these, but you get the idea. And just to show sort of how these physiographic regions come about, I want you to take a look at this state picture of its physiographic regions and then compare it with the geologic map of Pennsylvania. So what you can see here, notice where these big kind of curves are here, and I switch this back, notice how the curves are the same. And this is how closely our plant communities are tied to geology and soil types. So it's just to say that when we talk about native, we want to know what we're talking about. We want to make sure that we're putting the right plants in the right place. And so I also want to stress that we look at plant communities. So when we go out for hikes or walks around nature, we want to look at what's growing well together. And that guides us with our decision making for plants in our yard. So they exist in combination with one another. They support similar animals and insects at particular times. And so you really want to get out and look and see how Mother Nature has grouped things together. She does a really great job of it. And that can be inspiration for you. And so here, you could probably guess, if I'm going to ask you in chat, what kind of place do you think this is? What do you think we're looking at here? This is a plant community. It's all natural. You could put into chat, where do you think this is? It could be just a type of habitat. It doesn't have to be like the zip code. Higher altitude. Oh, that's a good guess. I could see that. Meadow. Good. So this is actually a dune habitat. This is at Sandy Hook National Recreation Area out on the Jersey Shore. And this is a dune habitat. So this is, you know, back a little bit from the ocean itself, but this is a plant community. So all these plants grow in conjunction together, serving different purposes, fruiting and flowering at different times with different shaped flowers, but providing for the wildlife that's there. And so here you see seaside goldenrod. This red down here, this is a fall photo, is Virginia creeper. You can see the blue berries here that will feed the birds that stick around and don't migrate. The goldenrod for late season pollinators. You have here the eastern red cedars that are growing, and you see this one is in full fruit, feeds more than 60 species of birds while they're migrating, and then the resident birds when they're hanging out over the winter. And then you have the dune grasses here. And so they're offering this wide variety of flower types and structures and habitat for the animals that grow and they're also the animals that live here. And also they're keeping sand in place, right? They're stopping erosion. They're helping to mitigate floods. So these exist in communities and they serve a purpose. That's my point. I think I've gotten that across, right? And so, so why a native garden? So we've talked about sort of what we should think about when we are planting native plants and including them in our landscape, that it's beyond, it's not just for us, that there's a much bigger picture to think about when we're including native plants. So one of the reasons people give for including native plants is to support the wildlife. And of course, that's important. So here we have Asclepias tuberosa. This is butterfly weed. There's a milkweed for every garden situation. And they're beautiful flowers with a great fragrance. And not only do they support monarchs, but they support a lot of other wildlife too. You can see here a honeybee, or I'm sorry, a bumblebee on the Asclepias flowers. So this is Asclepias tuberosa, the butterfly weed. It does have a better PR firm, I guess now, and now it's going by butterfly flower in a lot of the catalogs. I guess they didn't like the name butterfly weed, but butterfly weed is how I know it. So supporting wildlife. So as we create this community, you know, we want to think about what value these plants serve. We want to diversify the types of flowers, shapes of flowers, colors of flowers, so that we can attract as much and support as much diversity as possible. So this is a goldenrod supporting monarchs. And I mentioned monarchs about milkweed when I talked about milkweed, and it is true that monarchs need milkweed to survive. If we do not have milkweeds, we do not have monarchs, because their caterpillars, their larval stage, their caterpillars need milkweed to grow. It's a requirement of their life cycle. They will not survive without it. So if there's no milkweed, there's no monarchs. But that's the larval stage. And the milkweed supports, as we saw, bees and other butterflies in the adult stages. And then other plants will support monarchs in their adult stages, because when the monarchs are adults, they're just looking for nectar and they don't have to have milkweed at that point. They can go to any old flower they want to. So making sure that we're not just planting milkweed for the monarchs, but we're diversifying is really important, and the monarchs will take advantage of it. But we also want to remember that when we're planting native plants, we want to plant natives. If we want to support wildlife, you want to plant natives that support multiple life cycles. So you want to support the larval stage and the adult stage. And in a lot of cases with our caterpillars, with our moths and butterflies, and even our birds, it's the trees that support the larval stages. So Doug Tallamy, in his book that I talked about at the very beginning, he suggests if you could only plant one plant in your yard, you could plant a big tree, to plant a white oak, because the white oak supports the greatest diversity of insects and moths and butterflies of any plant, native plant to the area. And those caterpillars not only turn into butterflies and moths, but those caterpillars are gathered by the thousands by birds to feed their young. And so if you want to support the most wildlife, plant a white oak. So we want to think about all of the life stages when we're planting native plants. So we also want to think about how we care for our landscape. And when we're planting native plants, if we're planting native plants for wildlife, then it's really important that we plant them for, and we care for them in a way that makes it so wildlife can take advantage of them. So we don't want to cut back our seed heads in the fall to clean up, to do a fall cleanup, because we want to leave those seed heads for birds like this goldfinch that's on this. This is Rudbeckia maxima. This is the great coneflower, one of my favorites. And this is actually my front yard where I used to live in New Jersey. And we, you want to leave those seed heads up because they're going to take advantage of that. So we want to think also in a different way about cleanups and how we care for our landscapes. And again, we want to look to Mother Nature about how she handles things for guidance and how we can to support those systems. So nectar sources, larval sources are all very important. Here we see again the purple coneflowers, so another native perennial summer blooming purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, with a swallowtail butterfly nectaring on it. You can also see here, there's a honeybee using this. So if we can include native plants that support more than one type of critter, that's even better, right? And then this, if we leave this go to a seed head, it will support birds later on. So we can, this one flower can support all kinds of wildlife. And then many of us plant for the bees. And here we see a honeybee on hardy ageratum, which I learned as Eupatorium colistinum, but has changed names now. And I'm sorry, the new name is not coming to my head. So many things have, nothing makes me feel older than when the plant names change and I can't remember the new ones. So, so this is a honeybee on hardy ageratum. This is a perennial, it's blooming now. It's been blooming for the last month or so. It has this great purple color that almost glows in the dark. It will seed in. It will, if you have a space where you're having trouble with things growing or you need to fill in gaps, this will do that for you. So many of us plant to support the honeybees. We've heard about the plight of the honeybee, how honeybees are in decline. It's important to remember that honeybees are not native. They're European, and many other bees do the pollinating of our crops and of our native plants and our trees and our shrubs that makes it so that there's more in future years and we get the fruits. And so, so when we plant native plants, we want to understand that we will be planting for native bees. So there's thousands of species of native bees. Many of them are solitary. They just live on their own. Most of them, none of them, make honey. So a lot of people haven't found value in them. They don't understand that there are so many and that they're so important to us. And they range in size from the size of a grain of rice up to these big carpenter bees that you might be familiar with. And so it's important, tomatoes and blueberries are pollinated through buzz pollination, and that's done by bumblebees. It's not done by honeybees. They'll still go into the flower and they'll gather nectar, but the actual pollination process has to happen through bumblebees. And so we want to garden in a way where we understand the wildlife that's around us and we support that. So getting to know our native bees and other native insects, even if you think they might be creepy or uncomfortable, is really important. It's why we plant native plants. So the reason why we have different shaped flowers is because there's different shaped bees. Entomologists divide bees up into the length of their tongue. There's short-tongued bees and long-tongued bees. And those bees match up with different flowers. Long-tongued bees can take advantage of the nectar in tubular flowers, and short-tongued bees need flat flowers. And so it's important in our landscape when we're choosing native plants to support wildlife that we have that diversity of flower type and size and color and bloom time to support the diversity of insects. So here's a bumblebee that's prying open the flowers of a gentian. Now these gentian flowers stay closed. It's called a closed gentian, and they don't open. But the bumblebee knows how to get in and is strong enough to pry open those petals, get inside, buzz around, pollinate, get the nectar, and get back out of it. A smaller bee is not going to be able to do that. A honeybee is not going to be able to do that. So these flowers have evolved with these bees, and they've figured out how to work together. And so it's just important to understand. And then of course, different flower shapes attract different types of critters. So here we see a skipper on a Rudbeckia flower, and they provide a landing pad, and of course their colors and direct them in here. And we should remember that it's not just herbaceous plants, perennials that have flowers that attract insects. We also should always remember our trees and shrubs and their flowering too. Here we see a bumblebee in a purple flowering raspberry. You note all the pollen he has already on his legs. And so we can't neglect our trees and shrubs. So I really like the purple flowering raspberry. It's Rubus odoratus. The deer don't eat it. It doesn't have thorns, and it has these great big kind of 3-lobed leaves, and then those great big pink flowers. And it flowers from late spring into midsummer. Just stopped flowering maybe a week or two ago here at my house, and it colonizes. So it'll create this patch of it, and it doesn't really get fruit that's edible, but the flowers are pretty great, and I just really like it. And the insects like it too. And we have to get past, if we're planting for wildlife and using native plants, we want to get past the ick factor, or the fact that we only want to attract the beautiful butterflies or the imperiled monarchs. And we really have to understand that it is a system, and that we have to accept ones we don't like too, or maybe we're not as fond of. And so here are aphids, you can see here on a black-eyed Susan. And so we really want to think, so hummingbirds will actually go and collect aphids to feed their babies. And so we don't think of that, but teeny tiny insects are needed. Hummingbirds they don't just go to hummingbird feeders. They need protein too to raise their young, just like the chickadee needs caterpillars to raise its young. So does a hummingbird, but it needs much smaller protein. So aphids will serve that purpose. So we need to embrace the fact that we're going to have a system here, and there might be some things that kind of skeeve us out we're not a fan of. But if we have a healthy system, there'll be checks and balances in place. Nothing will get out of control. And it'll support, it'll be a cycle, support that system. This gets people a little skeeved out. This is the dogwood sawfly larva. I had these this is actually a picture from the dogwood in my yard. This is on alternate dogwood or pagoda dogwood, Cornus alternifolia. And so I had these large, so this is a fly. This will turn into a fly, not into a butterfly or a moth. This is not a caterpillar. It's actually fly larva. And what I noticed in 2 years in a row, they completely defoliated my pagoda dogwood. And I didn't do anything about it. I just waited to see what would happen. And what happened was, in the 3rd year, birds found them and started eating them. And now last year and this year, I have none of these on my pagoda dogwood at all. They just struck a balance, and they're in control now. I haven't seen them again. And so sometimes it takes patience and an understanding of what might happen. Now the 3rd year, I wouldn't let them defoliate it the 3rd year, because if plants defoliate 3 years in a row, they won't survive usually. So I was going to control it then, but I was keeping an eye on it, and sure enough, it became in balance in my yard. So if we're planting native plants for wildlife, we have to learn to accept holes in our leaves, insects we're not sure about. So we do want to get familiar with that. And then we have to understand also the spiders and the other critters that are associated with building the soils that our plants need. This millipede lives in my yard. Also, I just love him in his bright yellow socks. And we know that he's a millipede because he's got 2 pairs of legs per body segment. If he were a centipede, he'd only have 1. Right here, he's got 2. So that's how we know he's a millipede. And but these are the animals that are part of this system. So it's beyond just the plants that we pick at the garden center. And then it's also beyond beauty. So one of the plants that I have noticed attracts the most beneficial insects, including bees, but also parasitic wasps and other insects that will control bad insect populations, is mountain mint. This is Pycnanthemum. This particular one is Pycnanthemum muticum, but Pycnanthemum or mountain mints are amazing in the wildlife they attract. Look at all just the honeybees that are on here on this, but I am a nerd. And so I had this planted all around my front yard, and I sat with a field guide. I had a field guide close to my front steps, and I would grab it and I would just sit and watch this clump of plants. And at one point I counted 19 different species of insects on this plant. And this is as much as the flower does. It doesn't do much more than this. So it doesn't look showy to us. It might not be what we assume insects would want to go to, but I have never seen a plant that attracted more beneficial insects and more species and diversity than this plant. And so we have to think too, if we're planting native plants, that it's not just for us. We want to know what these plants do and what they can attract. So Pycnanthemum, mountain mint. It is a mint, so it is aggressive. It will spread. Mine was planted in between the house, the sidewalk, and the driveway. And so it was penned in and just sort of filled that space. But you do want to know that it will take up a lot of space. And then we want to get to know the unusual. We want to figure out who it is, and then accept, again, holes in plants. So this is a milkweed plant. This is common milkweed, and this is a milkweed bug, and it will eat the leaves, but it's okay. It belongs there. It's part of the system. It doesn't cause any problems at all. It's just there. Luna moths, beautiful moths, and I mean, stunning. They curl up as caterpillars in the leaves of sweet gum trees before the leaves drop in the fall. And so in the fall, as you're raking leaves, you might find a curled up leaf, and inside that is the caterpillar for this moth. And so if we're shredding leaves, getting rid of leaves, raking leaves, bagging leaves and throwing them away, we have the potential to be eliminating this population of this beautiful moth. And so we just want to be aware of what's going on, but also plant sweet gums. Many people don't like sweet gums because they have the spiky balls and the spiky fruit. And so people don't like them, but they support this. The Luna moth uses those a lot. And even if we can't see the flowers, you know, it's not for us, right? It's not just for us. So this is the tulip tree flower, and this fell in my yard onto the driveway. And the hummingbirds use this. It has aphids. So hummingbirds will go after the aphids, but they'll also go after the nectar. And it also gets pollinated by beetles and flies. And so it's important, but often they're 100 feet up in the air and we don't see them. But just because we can't see them and they don't delight us every day, doesn't mean that we shouldn't include them in our landscape when we're thinking about native plants. Is it true that milkweed is toxic to lanternflies? I've heard that, and I've seen that said, but I haven't seen the research that backs it up. And then we can think of native plant gardens as habitats supporting the cycles of life. So here a hawk is hunting, probably waiting to prey on a mammal. The mammals feed on other wildlife. And so we're supporting a cycle. We want to remember that for our plant communities. And then, so this is Nyssa sylvatica, black gum. And the black gum gets this fruit that feeds the birds. And we usually are delighted by this. It gets this great red fall color. It's a terrific tree, hardy. I think it should be included more in people's landscapes. I think it's underused. Gets this fruit that feeds wildlife, but then sometimes it looks like this because insects like to eat the leaves too. And so we have to appreciate all of that. Here is our shagbark hickory, which looks cool, but also underneath those flaps of bark, moths overwinter and bats have been found to overwinter under there. So we have to think of our plants as more than just decorative, they're habitats. Here's the sweet gum balls that people just don't like. The sweet gum, all the details, red fall color, right? This people just, but look, I've heard it called the Blue Jay's lunchbox. Here's a chickadee, I think, eating seeds out of this. So it's not just about what we like. This is spice bush blooming in the spring, very early blooms in the spring. Blooms, you can see almost nothing else except invasive plants are green at this point. And so this is flowering. Of course, it gets these yellow flowers in the spring, these red berries. You can find these now. They're edible by us if we wanted to eat them, but also supports the spice bush swallowtail butterfly. And it's the host plant for that. So without spice bush or sassafras, we don't have this insect. And so we need to know these associations. And if we're choosing forsythia because we want early yellow flowers, and it doesn't support any wildlife at all, maybe we choose the spice bush instead. So we want to think about alternates. Why are we picking a plant for our landscape? And is there a suitable native that will support wildlife that could do the same thing or do more? There's our sassafras. Sassafras also supported. This is the back end of the caterpillar too, by the way. Is it pretending that this is his head? So if something attacks him, it goes after this, but his head's up there. And here's sassafras flowers and fruit, very important for birds. Again, happen way up in the canopy. We hardly ever see these, but also important early flowering. So again, we just want to think of why the native plants. What else do they offer? They're beautiful to us, but what else can you do? I always tell people when you go to a garden center, you ask the plant, what else can you do? I understand the person is trying to sell me this now because it looks this way right now, but what else do you do? Do you support wildlife? Do you get good fall color? Can I eat you? You know, you want to know these things. Don't just let it show you one flower and be done with it. So why a native garden? You can help the environment with the native garden. So this plant is swamp pink, and swamp pink is a federally endangered plant in New Jersey. There's only a couple of small populations left in New Jersey, and there is debate among people about including endangered, rare, threatened plants in your landscape. There are some people who say you should not do that because you're going to screw up the genetics of the populations that are already existing. And then there's other people who are saying, well, our populations that are already existing are diminishing, so we need to do something to help them, so let's use our yards to help them. And there's pros and cons on both sides of those, and it's a much bigger talk than right now. But it's something important to think about, and that you have the possibility of contributing to helping with the environment when it comes to rare and endangered plants. But you do never want to wild collect anything. You always want to buy plants that you know have been grown by a reputable person, have not been collected from the wild, and are responsibly and ethically, the seed was responsibly and ethically collected, or the plant was propagated. So a native garden, less inputs. People say it requires less water, it requires less nutrients, that kind of thing. And that can be true, but in some ways it's not that those qualities are not exclusive to native plants. They are also qualities of plants that you see growing around all over the place. So it's really that they require less inputs and they support wildlife and our systems, which a lot of those other plants like burning bush and barberry, which don't require a lot of fertilizer and will grow anywhere and establish themselves. They don't need a lot of inputs, don't support the wildlife. So it's that in conjunction that's important. This is American plum, native fruiting plums. The flowers smell like honey, blooms in spring with like the cherries and things. A small flowering tree. And of course they're ornamental, right? So the native plants look nice, they're beautiful. And so when you're thinking about the beauty, again, you want to think about the diversity of the beauty. Flowering season, flower colors, flower fragrances, flower shapes. You want to have a mix of those because they are beautiful. Then it'll be more beautiful for you too, because you have something flowering or something of interest all through the year, but then you're supporting that system all through the year too. So Cornus Florida, this is our flowering dogwood. These are spring flowers again. So our ephemerals. So this is bloodroot. This is a wildflower, grows pretty reliably around us. The deer don't seem to bother it too much. One thing I will say about bloodroot and some other native plants, when you're choosing native plants for your landscape, sometimes you have an option for a variety that's been bred because it's more decorative. And bloodroot is an example. They sell a double flowering bloodroot where the reproductive parts of the plant have been replaced with extra petals and there's no pistils and stamens anymore. So then that plant becomes purely decorative. It's beautiful. It looks like a water lily. It is gorgeous, but it serves no purpose other than ornament. It doesn't provide any value in any way besides that. And so what I say is if you love that water lily looking bloodroot, get one, but also get a couple of the non-double, the single flowers, so that you can support wildlife too. Have a mix of that. This is Virginia bluebells, you know, just beautiful flowers. This is woodland phlox, ground cover. I took all of these in my yard one day in the spring, and wood poppy, you know, so they, yeah, so you have all this variety in shape and color. Viburnums, there's a viburnum for every garden, a native viburnum and a native milkweed for every garden, whatever situation you have, dry, wet, shade, dry, wet, sun, you have a viburnum and a milkweed you can grow there. And then some plants get a bad rap, but I want you to look more into them, think more about them, and consider how we've decided what native plants are of value and we want to include, and what native plants we've decided are a weed and they should all be killed. Is it you that's decided? Is it nature that's decided? Or is it marketing people and what's easiest to grow that's decided this? And so here we have sumac in its beautiful red fall color. And then here we have the white flowers and the green fruits, and then later the purple fruits of pokeweed, and they're stunning magenta stems. But for some reason, it feeds birds, it's perennial, it comes back year after year, it gives this tropical look, it's gorgeous, these colors, but we've decided it's a weed and it should all be killed. So, so we have to think about that too. If we're planting natives, you know, what do we decide to keep, and why are we keeping it or getting rid of it, for us or for the wildlife? So this is my front yard where I used to live. So here is the mountain mint, and my field guide and I would sit right here. This is the great coneflower, Rudbeckia maxima. And so I always end this talk with talking about not worrying about what the Joneses are doing. I have always been that neighbor that had the plants in the front yard that were taller than me, lots of wildlife going on, not a lot of lawn, getting rid of the lawn. And so we want to think more about the community of plants that we're trying to support and get beyond just thinking the person community and worried about what the community of houses looks like. We want to work on building our plant community and our diversity in our landscapes. And so we want to help them thrive. This again is my cut flower garden on the side of my house. And so we have Joe Pieweed, and we have cone flowers, and we have New York ironweed, and we have late blooming thoroughwort. And so they're blooming lots of different times, shapes, flowers, colors. And so we want to think about beyond our own people communities into a greater picture when we're thinking about native plants. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you might have them. And hopefully I will see you in the Arboretum. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all. But if there's no questions, there's still some time left in this gorgeous day to go out and enjoy it. And, you know, garden centers are open. So hopefully it gives you some inspiration for going out and get some new plants for your yard. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. I think I got everything. Karen, is it Karen who was doing that? Oh, now's the best time to plant bulbs. Any suggestions for native bulbs? Cindy, thank you for putting the names of plants in there. All of them looked good. And planting bulbs. I don't have any right now, but on October 3rd, I have Ask the Arboretum, and I can talk more about bulbs then. So that's a free program that Arboretum offers where you can just sign in and ask your plant questions and then leave. And so you can come and visit there, and just visit our website, arboretum.temple.edu, and our programs are listed there. And you can join us for Ask the Arboretum, and I'll talk bulbs. Well, thank you all for joining. All right. Have a good afternoon, everybody.